The scorching sun hung low over the dusty streets of Santa Mesa, a forgotten desert town barely clinging to existence. Faded storefronts lined the single road, their paint peeling and their windows caked with sand. Locals shuffled about, heads down, as if avoiding the oppressive weight of the sky. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still, where change was a stranger and secrets could burrow deep. Michael Bennett wheeled himself down the uneven sidewalk, his face a mask of calm. The former Marine sniper had been living in Santa Mesa for 5 years, long enough to become part of the background. Locals knew him as the quiet man who always helped fix a broken fence or watched over a neighbor's house while they were away. Few knew much about his past, and Michael preferred it that way. He had traded a life of action for solitude, seeking peace in the stillness of the desert. The town's only diner, Ruby's, was Michael's second home. He rolled in each evening, settling into his usual spot by the window. The familiar clatter of plates and the hum of conversation provided a soothing rhythm. Ruby herself, a gray-haired woman with a quick wit and a kind smile, greeted him warmly as always. "Evening, Michael." "The usual?" she asked, sliding a menu in front of him, though she knew he wouldn't need it. He nodded. "Thanks, Ruby." As she turned to the kitchen, the bell above the door jingled, announcing newcomers. Two men strode in, their boots leaving tracks in the dusty floor. Their presence was like a sudden storm cloud. Jason Colt, notorious troublemakers, had a reputation that preceded them. Leather jackets, unkempt hair, and cruel smirks told the story of countless towns left worse off by their passing. Michael's gaze flicked to the men briefly before returning to the view outside. He knew trouble when he saw it, and trouble had just walked through the door. The outlaws took a table near the counter, their loud laughter cutting through the subdued atmosphere. Colt, the younger and more hot-headed of the two, scanned the room, his eyes landing on Michael. He elbowed Jace and whispered something, prompting a grin from his older companion. Together, they sauntered over to Michael's table. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Colt drawled, leaning against the back of Michael's chair. "Didn't know they had a wheelchair parade in town today." The diner fell silent. All eyes turned to Michael, who remained still, his hands resting on the armrests of his chair. Ruby glared at the outlaws from behind the counter, but she knew better than to intervene just yet. Jace chuckled, crossing his arms. "Awfully quiet, aren't you? What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" Michael looked up, his expression unreadable. "Just enjoying my dinner. You boys should try it sometime." Colt bristled at the calm retort, his smirk fading. "You've got a smart mouth for someone who can't even stand up." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Maybe we should teach you some manners." Before either outlaw could act, a small figure stepped between them. Lisa, the diner's young waitress, stood with her hands on her hips, glaring up at Colt. "Leave him alone," she snapped. "You two aren't welcome here if you're just looking for trouble." Colt's eyes narrowed. "Stay out of this, little girl. You don't know who you're talking to. And you don't know who you're messing with." Lisa shot back, surprising everyone, including herself. Jace laughed, pulling Colt back. "Easy, Colt. Let's not waste time with small fries. We've got better things to do." They sauntered back to their table, but not before Colt shot Michael a parting glare. The tension in the room slowly dissipated as conversations resumed, though quieter than before. Ruby approached Michael, her face lined with concern. "You all right?" she asked softly. Michael nodded. "I've seen worse. Thanks for stepping in, Lisa." The young waitress blushed. "Someone had to. They're nothing but bullies." Michael's gaze lingered on the outlaws for a moment before he returned to his dinner. Inside, though, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. People like Jace and Colt didn't back down easily, and Michael knew better than to underestimate them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over Santa Mesa, Michael wheeled himself out of the diner and onto the deserted street. The air was still, but he could feel a storm brewing, one that would test the quiet life he had worked so hard to build. The night air was thick with tension as Michael wheeled himself home, his every move shadowed by the uneasy feeling that lingered from the diner confrontation. Santa Mesa's streets were eerily quiet, the occasional rustle of the desert wind stirring tumbleweeds across the cracked asphalt. Michael's house, a small, weathered structure on the edge of town, felt like a refuge, but tonight even its familiar walls couldn't shield him from the nagging sense of unease. Inside, he methodically locked the doors and windows, a habit born from years in the service. The faint scars on his hands caught the moonlight as he double-checked the latch on the front door. Each scar told a story, a testament to the battles fought and the life he had left behind. But those memories weren't just relics of the past. They were tools he'd relied on to survive. And tonight, he had a sinking feeling he'd need them again. Meanwhile, Jason Colt loitered near their bikes outside the diner, the neon sign flickering above them. The initial thrill of their harassment had faded, replaced by a simmering anger. Colt paced back and forth, his boots crunching against the gravel. "You let that cripple get away with disrespecting us," Colt spat, his voice low but seething. "We should have taught him a lesson right then and there." Jace leaned against his bike, lighting a cigarette with deliberate calm. "Relax, Colt. It's a small town. We'll cross paths with him again, and next time, he won't have that little waitress to stick up for him." Colt grunted, clearly unsatisfied. He kicked at a nearby rock, sending it skittering into the darkness. "Next time better come soon. I'm not letting this slide." Jace smirked, blowing a cloud of smoke into the air. "Don't worry. We'll make it count." Back at Michael's house, the veteran sat at his kitchen table, staring at a cup of untouched coffee. His mind raced, replaying the encounter at the diner. It wasn't the first time someone had underestimated him because of the wheelchair, but the outlaw's malice felt different. It wasn't just idle bullying. It was a challenge, a threat. A soft knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. Michael wheeled over cautiously, peering through the peephole. To his surprise, it was Lisa, the waitress from the diner. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting to be followed. "Lisa, what are you doing here?" Michael asked as he opened the door. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, stepping inside quickly. I couldn't stop thinking about what happened tonight. Those guys, Jace and Colt, they're bad news. Really bad news. I've seen what they've done to people in other towns." Michael nodded, closing the door behind her. "I figured as much. What do you know about them?" Lisa hesitated, wringing her hands. "They're part of a gang. Small time, mostly, but they've got a mean streak. They roll into towns like this, stir up trouble, and move on before anyone can stop them. But sometimes," her voice faltered, "sometimes they don't leave before someone gets hurt." Michael's jaw tightened. He'd encountered men like Jace and Colt before, bullies who thrived on fear and chaos. "Thanks for telling me," he said. "But you shouldn't be here. If they see you—" "I had to," Lisa interrupted. "You're not just some guy in a wheelchair, are you? There's something about you, the way you handled them. I don't think they know what they're up against." Michael looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." Lisa's visit was brief, but it left Michael with more to think about. As the hours crept toward midnight, he moved through the house, checking his defenses. The veteran's instincts, dulled but not forgotten, told him that the outlaws weren't done. And when they came, he'd be ready. Outside, the desert stretched silent and vast, its darkness broken only by the faint glow of Santa Mesa in the distance. Somewhere out there, Jace and Colt were planning their next move, oblivious to the storm they were about to unleash. For Michael Bennett wasn't just a quiet stranger in a wheelchair. He was a survivor, a warrior, and a man with nothing left to lose. The stillness of the desert night was deceptive. Inside Michael's home, the atmosphere was anything but calm. After Lisa's warning and the simmering tension with Jace and Colt, Michael had spent hours preparing. His training, honed over years of military service, surfaced like muscle memory, guiding his every move. Michael wheeled himself to the back room, where he kept a locked chest beneath a tarp. Inside lay remnants of his past, tools of survival he had hoped never to need again. A knife, a compact first aid kit, a flashlight, and a weathered map of Santa Mesa. But it was the pistol, carefully oiled and stored, that gave him pause. He hadn't touched a firearm since his injury, a self-imposed rule to distance himself from the violence of his past. Now, though, he had no choice but to confront the reality of his situation. "It's not about revenge," he muttered to himself, loading the weapon. "It's about survival." Outside, the desert wind howled, carrying with it the faint hum of motorcycles. Michael's sharp ears picked up the sound, and he rolled to the window, peeking through the curtains. Headlights cut through the darkness, growing brighter as they approached. Jace and Colt were back, and they weren't alone. 3 more riders joined them, their silhouettes menacing under the moonlight. The gang dismounted, their laughter carrying across the still night. They hadn't seen Michael yet, but their intentions were clear as they prowled around his property, kicking at his fence and shining flashlights into windows. Michael moved quickly and quietly, extinguishing the lights inside the house. He positioned himself near the front door, where he'd have a clear view of anyone approaching. His heart pounded, but his hands were steady. He wasn't afraid. He was ready. Outside, Jace barked orders to the others. "This guy thinks he's untouchable. Let's show him what happens when you mess with us." Colt grinned, smashing a beer bottle against the side of the house. "You hear that, old man? You're done for." Michael's voice, calm and firm, cut through the chaos. "Leave now, and you'll walk away unharmed. Push any further, and you'll regret it." The gang froze for a moment, startled by the unexpected defiance. Then Jace laughed, a deep, mocking sound. "Big talk from a guy who can't even stand. What are you gonna do, roll over us?" Michael said nothing, his silence more unsettling than any threat. The gang took it as weakness. Colt and another member began to approach the door, their boots crunching on gravel. That's when the first trap sprang. A tripwire, carefully strung across the walkway, sent Colt sprawling to the ground. He cursed loudly, clutching his leg, as the others backed away in confusion. Michael watched from the shadows, his tactical mind already calculating their next moves. "The hell was that?" Jace growled, yanking Colt to his feet. He scanned the property, his anger mounting. "He's messing with us. Find him." Inside, Michael moved to the back of the house, where he had set up another line of defense. Broken glass scattered across the floor, ensuring that anyone trying to sneak in would be heard. The window's latch was rigged to trigger an alarm, a simple setup involving a tin can and a few nails. It wasn't high-tech, but it was effective. The sound of glass shattering broke the silence as one of the gang members attempted to climb through a side window. The makeshift alarm rattled loudly, startling the intruder. Michael didn't hesitate. From his concealed position, he aimed his pistol and fired a warning shot into the air. "Next one won't miss," he called out. The gang scattered, cursing and shouting. Jace's voice rose above the chaos. "Get back here, you idiots. He's just one guy." Michael smirked. "One guy with a plan," he muttered. By the time the gang regrouped, their confidence had been shaken. Colt's limp and the rattled expressions of the others told Jace all he needed to know. This wasn't going to be as easy as they thought. "All right, old man," Jace shouted, frustration evident in his tone. "You've had your fun, but this ain't over." The gang retreated into the night, their motorcycles roaring as they disappeared into the distance. Michael didn't let his guard down until the last sound of their engines faded. Even then, he knew this was just the beginning. They'd be back, and next time, they'd be more prepared. As dawn broke over Santa Mesa, Michael surveyed the damage. His traps had worked, but they were only a temporary solution. The outlaws' persistence meant he'd have to take the fight to them before they had a chance to regroup. For the first time in years, Michael felt a spark of the old fire that had carried him through countless missions. He wasn't just defending himself, he was reclaiming the part of him that had been lost. And he wasn't about to let anyone take that away. The sun climbed higher over Santa Mesa, casting harsh shadows across the desert town. Michael spent the early morning reinforcing his defenses and gathering supplies. His movements were deliberate, his mind focused. Every action was a step toward ensuring his survival and teaching the outlaws that they had underestimated him. In the garage, Michael worked on his wheelchair, making subtle modifications. He reinforced the frame and adjusted the wheels for better maneuverability on rough terrain. Years in the field had taught him that preparation was key. This was no different. His home wasn't just a house. It was now a fortress. Lisa arrived mid-morning, her face a mix of worry and determination. She carried a brown paper bag of groceries, which she placed on the counter as Michael rolled into the kitchen. "I brought you some things," she said, unpacking the bag. "Thought you might need a few extras." Michael nodded his thanks. "You didn't have to do that. It's not safe for you to be here." Lisa's eyes narrowed. "And it's not safe for you to be here alone, either. Those guys aren't going to stop until they get what they want." Michael studied her for a moment, Despite her fear, there was a fire in her that reminded him of the soldiers he had served with. I'll be fine. I've handled worse. Maybe, but you don't have to handle it alone, Lisa replied. The sheriff should be involved. Someone needs to stop them. Michael shook his head. The sheriff won't be enough. Jace and Colt aren't just passing through. They've marked this town, and they won't leave until they're forced to. Lisa crossed her arms, frustration etched on her face. So, what's the plan? Sit here and wait for them to come back? Michael gave her a small, knowing smile. Not exactly. By midday, Michael had set his plan into motion. He mapped out key points in the town where the gang might regroup and identified the vulnerabilities in their strategy. The outlaws relied on fear and chaos, but they weren't prepared for someone who could outthink and outmaneuver them. Michael knew the gang would return under the cover of darkness, emboldened by their numbers and arrogance. He had to act before that happened. He loaded his modified wheelchair into the back of his old pickup truck, along with supplies and the pistol he hoped not to use. Lisa insisted on joining him, despite his protests. You might need someone to watch your back, she argued. Besides, I know this town better than you do. Reluctantly, Michael agreed. Together, they drove toward the outskirts of Santa Mesa, where the desert stretched wide and barren. The isolation worked in their favor, providing a tactical advantage. Michael stopped the truck near an abandoned gas station, a spot he suspected the gang might use as a meeting point. Stay here, Michael instructed Lisa as he unloaded his wheelchair. If anything goes wrong, drive back to town and don't look back. Lisa frowned, but nodded. Just be careful. Michael wheeled himself into position, his senses sharp. The heat of the day gave way to the cool of the evening, and the desert silence was broken only by the distant hum of approaching motorcycles. His instincts were right. Jace, Colt, and the rest of the gang rolled into view, their laughter echoing off the empty buildings. From his vantage point, Michael observed their movements. The gang was careless, spreading out as they dismounted their bikes. Jace barked orders, but the others barely listened, their overconfidence evident. Michael waited for the right moment, his patience a weapon in itself. When the gang began to settle, Michael made his move. Using a makeshift slingshot, he launched a small, smoke-emitting device toward their position. Confusion erupted as the area filled with thick, choking clouds. Michael used the chaos to his advantage, moving silently through the shadows. One by one, he isolated the gang members, using traps and misdirection to disarm and disable them. A tripwire here, a strategically placed noise there. Michael's tactics were methodical and precise. By the time the smoke cleared, half the gang was incapacitated, their bravado replaced with panic. Jace's roar of anger cut through the night. Show yourself, you coward! Michael emerged from the shadows, his pistol drawn but pointed at the ground. Coward. Funny. Coming from someone who hides behind numbers? Jace sneered, drawing his own weapon. You think you're tough because you got the drop on us? Let's see how tough you are now. The standoff was tense, the weight of their pasts hanging heavy in the air. Michael's calm demeanor only fueled Jace's frustration, but Michael wasn't about to let his emotions dictate his actions. Walk away, Michael said evenly. Take what's left of your crew and leave Santa Mesa. This is your only warning. Jace hesitated, his confidence faltering as he glanced at the scattered remains of his gang. Finally, he lowered his weapon, his eyes filled with simmering rage. This isn't over. It is if you're smart, Michael replied. The gang retreated, their bikes roaring into the night. Michael watched them go, knowing they might return but confident that Santa Mesa's message had been sent loud and clear. Lisa emerged from her hiding spot, relief washing over her face. You did it, she said. Michael shook his head. Not yet, but it's a start. The night after the confrontation, Michael found himself back at home, his mind racing with thoughts of the gang's retreat. Though they had fled, he knew Jace's parting words were a promise of more trouble to come. Michael needed answers, and there was only one way to get them. He would have to dig deeper into the gang's motives and connections to the town. Lisa, refusing to leave his side, had become an invaluable ally. She had returned to the diner the next morning and discreetly gathered information from patrons about Jace and Colt. By noon, she was back at Michael's house, her face pale but determined. I found something. she began, placing a stack of papers on Michael's kitchen table. They're not just random troublemakers. Jace and Colt are part of a bigger operation, a gang called the Dust Reapers. They've been running smuggling routes through towns like ours, using intimidation to keep people quiet. Michael's jaw tightened. Smuggling what? Weapons, mostly, Lisa replied. But there's more. They've got ties to a corrupt developer trying to buy up land around Santa Mesa. People have been forced to sell their property after accidents or incidents involving the gang. Michael's eyes darkened. So they're not just passing through. They're here to stay. Lisa nodded. And they'll do whatever it takes to make that happen. But I found something else. Jace used to work for the developer. He knows this area inside and out. If we can find out where he's holed up, we might be able to stop them before they strike again. Michael spent the rest of the day studying the maps and notes Lisa had gathered. His military training kicked in, helping him identify potential hideouts and choke points where the gang might be operating. One location stood out, an abandoned quarry on the outskirts of town. It was isolated, difficult to access, and large enough to hide a smuggling operation. By sunset, Michael and Lisa were on the road, heading toward the quarry in his old pickup truck. The desert stretched out before them, its vast emptiness both intimidating and oddly calming. Lisa drove in silence, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Michael sat beside her, his mind a whirlwind of calculations and possibilities. You don't have to do this, Michael said finally, breaking the silence. It's dangerous. Lisa shot him a determined look. Neither do you. But here we are. Michael allowed himself a small smile. Fair enough. They arrived at the quarry under the cover of darkness. The area was eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from the occasional rustle of wind through the brush. Michael scanned the surroundings with his binoculars, noting the faint glow of a campfire near the center of the quarry. Shadows moved in the firelight, confirming their suspicions. The Dust Reapers were there. Looks like 5, maybe 6 of them, Michael whispered. Jace and Colt are probably in charge. The rest are just muscle. What's the plan? Lisa asked, her voice steadied despite the tension. Michael outlined his strategy, using the terrain to their advantage. He would create a diversion while Lisa stayed hidden, observing and recording as much as she could. If things went south, she was to head back to town and alert the sheriff. And if you get caught? Lisa pressed. Michael met her gaze. I won't. The plan unfolded with precision. Michael used his modified wheelchair to navigate the rocky terrain silently, planting small noisemakers in strategic locations around the quarry. When he triggered the first device, the gang's attention snapped to the sound, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. What was that? One of the gang members muttered, his voice tinged with unease. Jace barked an order. Spread out. Find whoever's out there. As the gang scattered, Michael moved closer to the campfire, his silhouette hidden by the shadows. He spotted Jace and Colt near a makeshift table covered in maps and documents. Their conversation was heated, their voices low but audible. The shipments are delayed, Jace growled. If we don't deliver on time, the whole operation's screwed, Colt scoffed. It's not my fault. That old man and his little waitress friend are stirring up trouble. We should have taken them out when we had the chance. Jace slammed his fist on the table. We'll deal with them soon enough. But first, Michael didn't hear the rest. He had what he needed. With careful precision, he retreated into the darkness, avoiding the scattered gang members. When he reached Lisa's hiding spot, she was ready to go, her phone filled with photos and recordings of the gang's activities. Did you get it? Lisa asked as they climbed back into the truck. Michael nodded. We got enough to bring them down. Michael didn't hear the rest. He had what he needed. With careful precision, he retreated into the darkness, avoiding the scattered gang members. When he reached Lisa's hiding spot, she was ready to go, her phone filled with photos and recordings of the gang's activities. Did you get it? Lisa asked as they climbed back into the truck. Michael nodded. We got enough to bring them down. The morning light broke over Santa Mesa, painting the desert in hues of orange and gold. For most of the town, it was just another day. But for Michael and Lisa, it marked the beginning of their final stand. Armed with the evidence they had gathered, they arrived at the sheriff's office before the town had fully awakened. Sheriff Daniels, a grizzled man with decades of service etched into his face, listened intently as Michael and Lisa laid out the details. Maps, photos, and recordings painted a clear picture of the Dust Reapers' operations and their ties to the corrupt developer. When they finished, the room fell silent as the sheriff mulled over their words. "You've given me enough to act," Daniel said finally, his tone grim. "But we'll need more than just me and my deputies to handle this. Those men are dangerous." Michael nodded. "I'll help. This is my fight as much as it is yours." Lisa stepped forward. "And I'm not backing down either." Daniels gave them both a hard look before nodding. "All right, but we do this by the book. No heroics." By midday, the plan was in place. Deputies discreetly positioned themselves around the quarry, cutting off potential escape routes. Michael and Lisa stayed with Daniels, providing guidance based on their reconnaissance. The wait was tense, every passing moment stretching their nerves taut. When the signal came, a coordinated sweep began. The deputies moved in, their approach swift and silent. Michael watched from a distance, his sharp eyes tracking every movement. For a moment, it seemed the operation would go smoothly. Then, a gunshot shattered the quiet. Chaos erupted as the Dust Reapers scrambled to defend their territory. Jace's voice roared above the fray, rallying his men. "Hold your ground! Don't let them take us down!" Michael clenched his fists. "Daniels, I'm going in." The sheriff hesitated, but saw the determination in Michael's eyes. "Be careful." Michael moved through the chaos with practiced precision, his wheelchair navigating the rough terrain with ease, thanks to his earlier modifications. The sound of gunfire and shouts filled the air, but his focus remained unbroken. He spotted Lisa crouched behind a rock, her phone capturing the scene for evidence. She gave him a nod, her expression a mix of fear and resolve. As Michael advanced, he saw Jace and Colt near the center of the quarry, barking orders at their remaining men. Michael's path was clear. He maneuvered closer, using the cover of smoke and debris to stay hidden. When he was within range, he called out, "Jace, it's over. Call off your men." Jace whirled around, his face a mask of fury. "You again. Should have taken care of you when we had the chance." Colt raised his weapon, but Michael was faster. A shot from his pistol struck the ground near Colt's feet, making him stumble back. "The next one won't miss," Michael warned. Jace sneered, his bravado faltering as he glanced at the dwindling number of his men. "You think you can just roll in here and take us down?" Michael's gaze was steady. "No, I already have." The deputies closed in, their coordinated efforts overwhelming the gang. One by one, the Dust Reapers surrendered, their weapons clattering to the ground. Jace and Colt were the last to fall, their defiance crumbling under the weight of their defeat. As the dust settled, Michael wheeled himself to the center of the quarry, his eyes meeting Jace's. "You made a mistake coming to Santa Mesa. People here don't back down. Not to you, not to anyone." Jace didn't respond, his face twisted with anger and shame as the deputies cuffed him and led him away. Hours later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Michael and Lisa stood outside the sheriff's office. The town was quiet again, the weight of the day's events finally lifting. "You did it," Lisa said softly. "We did it." Michael gave her a small smile. "This town did it. Together." Sheriff Daniels approached, his expression one of gratitude. "We couldn't have done it without you. Both of you." Michael nodded, just doing what needed to be done. As Lisa drove him home, the desert stretched out before them, vast and unchanging. But for the first time in years, Michael felt a sense of peace. He had fought, not just for himself, but for the town that had become his home. And in doing so, he had reclaimed a part of himself he thought he had lost forever. Santa Mesa had been tested, but it had endured, and so had Michael. The following morning, Santa Mesa stirred with a renewed sense of unity. News of the Dust Reapers' downfall spread quickly, and the townspeople's gratitude for Michael's courage and the sheriff's swift action was palpable. Though the remnants of the gang had been rounded up and their operation dismantled, the scars of their presence lingered in the minds of those they had terrorized. Michael sat on his front porch, the quiet of the morning a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous day. His wheelchair rested beside him, the modifications he'd made a reminder of the battle he had fought not just for the town, but for himself. Lisa arrived with 2 steaming cups of coffee, handing one to Michael before settling into the chair beside him. "The sheriff said they're transferring Jace and Colt to the county jail today," Lisa said, taking a sip. Looks like they'll be out of our hair for good. Michael nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Good. This town deserves some peace. Lisa studied him for a moment, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. You know, you've become something of a hero around here. People are talking about throwing a celebration, maybe even naming a day after you. Michael shook his head, a faint chuckle escaping him. I'm no hero, just a guy who couldn't stand by and watch people get hurt. Maybe that's exactly what makes you a hero, Lisa replied softly. As the day unfolded, Michael took the opportunity to revisit parts of Santa Mesa that he hadn't seen in years. The town's resilience was evident in the way its people went about their routines, determined to rebuild and move forward. At the diner, Ruby greeted him with a warm smile, sliding a plate of his favorite breakfast across the counter. On the house, she said with a wink. It's the least I can do after what you did for us. Michael accepted the gesture with a nod, the familiar smells and sounds of the diner grounding him. He saw faces he recognized, each one offering a word of thanks or a pat on the shoulder. Though he had never sought recognition, the gratitude of the town felt like a balm for wounds he hadn't realized were still healing. That evening, a gathering formed in the town square. It wasn't an official celebration, but rather an organic outpouring of community spirit. Families brought food, children played in the fading light, and laughter filled the air. Michael watched from the edge of the crowd, his presence both welcomed and respected. Lisa found him and gestured toward the center of the gathering. Come on, they want you to say something. Michael hesitated, but the encouraging smiles from the crowd spurred him forward. As he wheeled to the front, the townspeople fell silent, their attention focused on him. Michael cleared his throat, his voice steady but humble. I'm not one for speeches, he began, but I want to say thank you. Not just for this, he gestured to the gathering, but for reminding me what it means to belong to a community. I came here looking for peace, and I found something even better. A home. This town fought back, and it won. That's a victory we can all share. The crowd erupted into applause, and Michael felt a wave of emotion wash over him. For so long, he had seen himself as a solitary figure, disconnected from the world he had once fought to protect. But here, among these people, he had found a sense of purpose he hadn't realized he was missing. As the night wore on, Michael and Lisa sat on a bench near the edge of the square, watching the townspeople laugh and dance under the string lights. The weight of the past day's events began to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment. You know, this could be a fresh start for you, Lisa said, breaking the silence. Not just for the town, but for you too. Michael glanced at her, a small smile playing on his lips. Maybe it already is. The two sat in companionable silence, the sounds of the celebration mingling with the soft rustle of the desert wind. For the first time in years, Michael felt at peace, not because the battle was over, but because he had finally found a place where he belonged. Santa Mesa had given him more than a home. It had given him a reason to keep fighting, not for survival, but for something greater. And as the stars lit up the night sky, Michael knew that this victory was just the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The days following the Dust Reaper's downfall marked a turning point for Santa Mesa. The quiet desert town, once paralyzed by fear, now thrummed with a newfound vitality. People who had kept to themselves began to reconnect, sharing stories of resilience and offering support to one another. It was as if the shadow that had loomed over the town had finally lifted, letting the sun shine brighter than ever. Michael Bennett, once a solitary figure, found himself at the heart of this transformation. Though he had sought nothing more than peace when he arrived in Santa Mesa, his actions had inspired something far greater. He became a symbol of strength and perseverance, not just for the town, but for anyone who had ever felt overlooked or underestimated. One morning, as Michael rolled down Main Street, he was greeted by waves and smiles from nearly every person he passed. Ruby had painted a new sign for her diner, its bold letters reading, "Home of Santa Mesa's Hero." The gesture made Michael chuckle, but deep down, it warmed him to know his efforts had made a lasting impact. Lisa met him outside the diner, her usual fiery energy tempered by a quiet determination. "Busy day ahead," she said, handing him a folder. "The sheriff wants to meet with us about organizing a town watch. He says you're the only one who can help make it happen." Michael raised an eyebrow. "I thought my fighting days were over." "Not fighting," Lisa corrected. Protecting. There's a difference. Michael smiled. All right, let's see what we can do. At the sheriff's office, a group of townspeople had gathered, their faces a mix of hope and determination. Sheriff Daniels stood at the front, outlining plans for a volunteer-led town watch. Michael listened carefully, offering insights from his military experience to strengthen their strategy. It wasn't long before the group began to gel, united by a shared purpose. With this, Daniel said, gesturing to the group, we can ensure Santa Mesa stays safe. And it's all thanks to you, Michael. Michael shook his head. It's thanks to all of us. This town fought back together. I just did my part. The room erupted in applause, and for the first time, Michael felt truly at home among these people. They weren't just neighbors, they were a family, bound by shared struggles and triumphs. That evening, Michael returned to his house, the weight of the day's events settling over him. He sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The desert stretched out before him, vast and unchanging, yet it felt different now. It wasn't just a place to escape to, it was a place worth protecting. Lisa arrived a short while later, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. She handed one to Michael before settling into the chair beside him. You've done a lot for this town, she said, her voice soft. More than most people would. Michael took a sip of his drink, his gaze fixed on the horizon. This town's done a lot for me, too. I didn't realize how much I needed it until now. Lisa smiled. So, what's next? You've already taken down a gang and helped set up a town watch. Seems like you're running out of things to do. Michael chuckled. There's always more to do. But for now, I think I'll just enjoy the quiet. As the stars began to fill the night sky, Michael reflected on how far he had come. When he first arrived in Santa Mesa, he had been a man searching for peace, burdened by the weight of his past. Now, he was part of a community that had faced its fears and emerged stronger. He had found not just a home, but a purpose, and in doing so, he had rediscovered himself. Santa Mesa would never forget the day Michael Bennett stood up for it, even when he couldn't stand. And Michael would never forget the town that gave him a reason to keep fighting. Not with fists or weapons, but with hope, courage, and the unyielding belief that even the smallest voices could make a difference. As the desert wind whispered through the quiet streets, Michael leaned back in his chair, a content smile on his face. The battle was over, but the impact would last forever. If this story inspired you, remember that resilience and courage can overcome even the toughest challenges. Santa Mesa's journey reminds us all of the power of community and the strength found in unexpected places. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories like this one. Leave a like, share with someone who loves stories of hope and triumph, and activate the notifications bell to stay updated on our latest stories. Together, we can make every voice matter.